Elise,
Tim.
welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Last time I saw you, I think I was acing you on the tennis court.
If I remember correctly, I took away the W.
That is true. Elise and Collin dominated a Memorial Day mixed doubles tournament. I will say that was, well, Shannon was my partner. And I will say it was her very first time playing tennis.
Oh my God.
Which is odd.
We beat you when you were playing with Elliot, my brother, who...
It was also Elliot's first time.
So Tim's not telling the truth.
Elliot was like high school champ. And
Was he really?
It was the first time I ever beat Elliot.
Elliot was not... Oh, he was the champ of the family in high school?
No, of the high school.
That can't be right because I know this because... Well, Elliot's older than me, but I made it to the state tournament
I love Tim
my freshman year
correcting this.
in doubles, and I played Barrington at the state tournament first round, and I got my ass smacked around the court, and it was like... I think it was like 1-0. It was like maybe a 25-minute match.
Do you remember the names of any of the players?
Yeah, it was Adam Morgan, who Elliot later told me his
yep.
dad was a tennis pro, so
Yep.
that explains that. And I don't remember who his partner was.
Okay.
But I think they made it pretty far in the tournament, so I didn't feel that bad.
Nice.
But yeah, Barrington had a pretty strong team compared to Woodstock.
Joiners listeners are going to love this tennis history.
It's important information.
I mean, you're wearing your U.S. Open hat, which, people might not be able to
It's probably
see
this
through.
U.S. Open golf.
Yeah, this is a golf U.S. Open hat. But
he is a
enough.
tennis fan.
I don't talk about golf.
Danny was invited to go to the U.S. Open with me last year. He declined.
That's true.
Not even politely. He just declined.
Yeah, I just pretended I never saw the messages.
Yeah. So anyway, you and Collin, do you play tennis together frequently? As a team?
No, well, we play just singles against
Yeah.
each other once a week, and then this summer we're playing some mixed doubles.
And does that get pretty heated?
Oh yeah.
I would imagine.
Where do you guys play?
This summer we're doing just Park District League, essentially playing mixed doubles, and then I play at Midtown on a women's team.
Oh, cool.
But Collin is very competitive, which Tim knows because they play.
He's extremely athletic.
Every once in a while.
He hasn't even been playing tennis that long. He's very good.
He played a little growing up, but not on a team like we did.
Yeah, sure.
But very competitive and like better at leading the winningness. So I have to keep up. Or really,
The couple that plays together stays together. And you guys also play music together.
We do, and we run this whiskey distillery together.
Yeah,
so
I feel like that's
we like each other.
Yeah, that from a brand holistically, I feel like a bluegrass band couple that makes whiskey together, it's a nice package.
Yeah, it's a vibe.
Yeah,
It's
a great vibe.
What instrument do you play, or what?
Primarily play stand-up bass and sing. Collin plays guitar and sings, and we in this band, Big Sadie, we both write songs. Every so often, I'll play guitar. If we're doing a duo show, we'll do two guitars.
Is the singing shared equally?
Yeah, I'd say we both have.
Who's got the better range?
We both we have a very similar range, which I think is probably
Really?
why it works for bluegrass and country music. But Collin is like a little higher tenor. I've got a low alto, so we end up kind of trading parts a little bit.
That's cool.
High tenor, low alto.
Have you always been into music?
Yeah, I grew up playing piano, played French horn in
Wow.
band, started playing guitar in high school. So
you can play a bunch of instruments.
not very well, but yeah, I still I'll perform on bass, guitar, or keyboard.
Cool.
It is a very musical family.
Yeah, our parents both played piano, guitar, trombone. My dad was a trombone player. That's where I got the horn.
Nice.
Did they start you guys all the same way, or was it just individual interests?
Individual, we did. Everybody started piano pretty young, and then band and big suburban school starts in 5th grade. So that's when my older brother and I started playing band instruments. My younger sister, who is music full time as an adult, she started violin at like 3 or 4. So a little sooner.
3 or 4. I couldn't. Could you imagine Arthur with a violin at 3?
Not.
Could you imagine with a violin at 10?
I could imagine getting hit by a violin if he's 3 or 4 holding one.
Well, Lewis plays fiddle, right?
Yeah. So same instrument, just different style of playing.
Mm-hmm.
Violin lessons, but he actually takes all 3 of our kids take lessons from Jess McIntosh, who's the fiddle player in our band.
Oh, cool.
So she does a little bit of classical, Suzuki.
And do they cooperate?
Yeah, my kids are very cooperative.
Have you not met?
In general.
Have you not met Lewis?
No.
He is the most polite boy I've ever met.
How old?
Oh, that's so sweet. He'll be 8 in a couple weeks.
Okay. It's legit. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine even you all playing piano at such a young age and not like fighting back.
No, I think you just have to get it. And
I hated practicing piano when I was a kid. I started when I was like 7.
I hear so many of those stories where someone's like, I was forced to take piano. I hated everything.
Yeah, that's why I wonder, like, did your parents do something special with the messaging? Was it just like on your terms? Like, my mom was like, you have to practice 20 minutes a day. And I'm like, 20 minutes? I'll die. I'll die during that time.
I definitely push back on practicing and, taking classical piano and wanting to learn the pop songs, or taking jazz piano. And that I think stayed engaging when I was a little bit older, but certainly a struggle. And I remember all my siblings like begging to quit or coming home crying and wanting to not do it.
That checks out.
And I think our parents did a pretty good job of making it sort of a requirement, or it's the expectation. It's like behavior, or it's an expectation, but letting us
Bergman Gen Ed
direct it enough that it felt like something that we wanted to be doing, and then time away from music. I think we all kind of came back to it on our own terms as well.
Okay.
So did you begin...
not through. And Collin, who plays, my husband and business partner and bandmate, he grew up, his mom, my tennis partner and opponent. Yep. His mom is a musician. She's actually a fiddle player and ballad singer. And so Collin grew up playing a little bit of violin, a little trumpet, then didn't want to play and came back to guitar in high school. And
I think that's a common story too.
Right. And even said, like, why did you let me quit?
Yeah.
And his mom is like, well, I don't think you would enjoy music now as much as you do if I had forced you to stick with it.
Yeah.
So,
do you think if Lewis depart, because he's probably into it now, right?
He likes it. It's a struggle to get the kids to practice. And violin is tricky. It's like a screechy instrument, and it's hard to it's an instrument that you play with other instruments. So without that element,
to tune it? Do you help tune it?
Oh, it's such a hands-on, like, parent or teacher instrument. Lewis has started to play piano, and that, like, I think he can see the melody is a little easier to grasp on the piano, and he'll sit down on his own and play something.
Do you think that, like, humans have a language acquisition device where, like, there's a sweet spot for learning? This is my theory that maybe I've talked about it, but I think, your vocabulary explodes at a certain age. Do you think that there's a certain aptitude at a certain age for learning music too? That's how I justify not learning as an adult. I'm like, well, I'm past that stage.
Yeah. And I think, with my sister who played violin and was in orchestra and really excelled in that kind of early elementary phase, I saw that happening, but I was already in like 5th or 6th grade and said, well, maybe I want to play violin. And like people said, no, you're too old. And so I think string instruments, there is like, it starts in that age, or 3 seems a little early. And a couple teachers or a couple of musicians that we play with said that 4 is kind of the prime age for,
which is
from what I've heard.
Yeah.
But as a parent, you kind of try to let your kids guide based on, we happen to have 3 kids and they all have extremely different personalities and are motivated by different things. So trying to let them feel like they're leading something, or that they have the opportunity to be independent and feel fully supported and secure in those explorations. Mm-hmm. And, as somebody who taught for a long time, I think that's also sort of an important way to approach anything, or employees, not like manipulating somebody into thinking that it was their idea, but recognizing what people's skills are, what their strong suits are, how they communicate, how they receive affection and affirmation, and all of that. I think it's a valuable lesson to learn if you're in a leadership or instruction or parenting role.
Yeah. I never thought of the parallels between parenting and running a business. I guess because I don't have kids, but I guess when you're in an authoritative stance, or as an authority figure, you're in charge of guiding the path, I guess.
Right, or just you're responsible for a lot of things. I mean, it could be livelihood, it could be keeping somebody alive.
So did you start drinking whiskey at a young age too then?
No, I was kind of straight edge growing up. So I think it's easy for me to approach it as like a craft and grow up playing music, doing a lot of visual arts and really interested in food and, agriculture. This is kind of an extension of that for me. And I think it's important as a brand that we're not, promoting drinking. It's a sipping whiskey. It's a high quality product with a lot of thought and kind of community that's built into it. And so trying to build a liquor brand that represents something.
Well, I've never taken a shot of your whiskey.
I don't allow it.
That's the rule of the
never
tap
done
room.
it. I have. We have some really cute little vintage cordial glasses, so you're allowed to take a shot out of one of those.
Yeah, it has to be out of a sweet vintage cordial glass.
But I sort of discourage that.
Yeah. That's a real inflection point in a night when the shots start going.
Yeah, anyway. The original Del Maguey mezcal cases used to ship with a sip it, don't shoot it on the side.
It's good. I think there's so much that goes into making it. You don't want to see it just get wasted on.
So how did the distillery come to be?
So, as I mentioned, growing up doing a lot of visual arts and interested in food and presentation, I think what I wanted to do when I grew up after, I was like, I want to be the first female president. Then I wanted to be a doctor, but starting around 10, I would say I want to either open a restaurant or own a boutique. And I sort of have had the opportunity to kind of do something that really is encompassed by that. But it was a desire to create beautiful things and bring people together to enjoy them. So I don't know that I very intentionally as a 10-year-old started to pursue that, but did make jewelry and sell it out of my backpack, or always kind of had this entrepreneurial spirit and creative drive.
We met through clothing at Isles Factory, I believe.
Yes.
I mean, I always try to figure how I know. We talked about this on Memorial Day. We know your whole family, but I couldn't tell you where we met or when it was.
What's the linear timeline?
You've just kind of always been around, or we've always been around, or whatever.
Right, but probably 15 years ago, or maybe not quite that long, 12 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, pre-stock for sure.
We met, and I was, AI is a manufacturer here in town, does a lot of uniforms. Tim has done, or former business partners with the son of the family that founded that business, but they were doing a uniform project. So I had a clothing line under my name for a long time, and with my interest in food and hospitality, did a lot of uniforms, consulting, interiors, basically tactile goods for restaurants and hotels. And so,
what was Kinfolk was the restaurant I helped with, I think. Is that what it's called?
Kinfolk was that seafood restaurant.
Yeah, it was kind of in
River
that River North area, but West River North.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that was the first thing we actually worked on together.
Yeah.
Did you ever work with Isles' parents at the factory?
Met both of them, but
Sam and Chong.
They did a jacket for the clothing line that I have now, kind of recently, and they're there just cutting all of the fabric, or very hands-on.
Yeah, Isles' dad is still there every single day.
Yeah,
ripping a cigarette. Actually, no, he doesn't smoke anymore. He's got health problems. But when I was there every day, he was just in the cutting room, cigarette in his mouth, and just kind of speaking in haikus, words of wisdom. He is a cool family.
Here's a potentially dumb question.
Sure.
If you are smoking cigarettes near all the fabric, how does the fabric not take on the smell of cigarette smoke?
I've always wondered that, and I think it's because the cutting room is so huge.
Super high ceilings.
They're also Korean, and there's a very funky fridge there, and
you've talked
and so
about
this
that.
always smells like kimchi in the in the cutting room too, and the clothes never smell like kimchi or cigarettes.
Well,
so.
That
Must be the ventilation.
But cigarette smoke, when you're in a bar, or when you used to be in a bar that had smoking, or
terrible.
If you're overseas, you'd come home and you'd stink like cigarette smoke.
I mean, I use a lot of vintage fabrics too, or I'll source from eBay or antique stores, and there's always comes from a smoke-free home, and you can tell. Exactly. You can tell when it doesn't. So I think it lingers.
Some magic
Do you have a trick for getting rid of that smell?
No, she doesn't buy that. She buys
You
the
have to wash with
vinegar.
Vinegar, let it dry in the sunshine. Some of that natural bleach.
And pray over it.
That's like, you ever go to Richard's Bar?
No.
The one bar.
Oh, also
where you can still smoke.
Yeah.
River
It's
North,
like Grand and Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And Ashland.
If you wear a disposable outfit to that bar, you won't want to wear those clothes again, even after the sunshine dry.
I didn't know that was legal.
So who wanted to do the whiskey distillery? Is that you or your partner?
So,
or your husband?
Collin and I, with my background in design, hospitality, and then a big interest in growing food, kind of from an like herbalism and nutrition point of view, but just discovery and curiosity too. And then his interest, he works as an engineer for a long time, but also, we have had a garden for a long time, and just super curious human. Have this band together. We kind of daydreamed about what our long-term goals were. So talked about sort of retirement plan. It's like, let's buy an old fire station and convert it into a community spot, music venue, health food, home-brewed beer, whatever it is. So just kind of early in our relationship, knew that we worked well together and enjoyed doing things together, and kind of started talking about what it would look like to actually go into business together, or put our efforts. He didn't want to help me with my clothing line. What's something that we could do that ties together all of our skills and interests collaboratively? So we just started talking about that. We were, making kombucha, home-brewed beer, sprouted grains. I started making bitters with some of the herbs that I was growing, and just sort of riffed off of what we did together. He started thinking about whiskey because it's like there are so many microbreweries, but there aren't really these small craft distilleries, not in this area anyway. And whiskey is something that he enjoys drinking with friends. It's kind of been his spirit of choice. So we started kind of thinking about that. He actually started applying to business schools, so studied for the GMAT and GRE, thinking that if we're going to start a project of this scale, we need to bring in some outside partners, or having a small clothing line, you can sell a few dresses and then make a few more, and this wasn't going to be able to scale in the same way.
Much higher startup costs.
Yeah. But he, a little bit of a sideline, he was working as a civil engineer in water resources, and somebody that he worked with heard that he was applying for grad school, and he essentially got offered to get a master's in his field, civil and environmental, in the top program in his field. And so it's like, well, okay, I'll do this. It's a 1.5 year program. That's valuable for like long-term career. And then if I like school, so then I can do business school after that. So, and also it didn't seem very accessible. Separately, my dad, he's an entrepreneur, ran a business for a long time in the finance realm. Always had ideas for us. It's like, oh, you're a designer, you're an engineer. Let's design a retractable fence to keep the deer from eating the hosta or whatever. It's like, no, not too interested in that. Or Collin and my brother Elliot, who we talked about earlier, did end up building this really beautiful stone wall at the family property where I grew up. So my dad was always kind of engaging us in our skills, because he knew that we were passionate about things
and capable of execution. Like the fire pit at your house is like, I was like, man, this is a cool fire pit, and Ellie's like, well, you don't even know like how this thing was designed. And then he explained to me, I was like, wow, a lot went
what's
into this
the fire pit
one
story?
Fire pit. It's just, I don't know, you just kind of hike up in the woods and it's a fire pit, but it's
council
like
ring, meeting of the minds. You gotta
it's where you'd go for a Zanza.
Create space in nature to come together.
But it's like aligned some way with directions, maybe guided by the stars or something like that. It's all very intentional.
That was an Elliot and Dad project that I appreciate, but was not as involved. But my dad was super curious and able and just always engaging people to do the best with their ideas. And separately, one of these times, it's like, okay, you're a designer, you're an engineer. He said, bourbon is huge. But what we like, and we would buy my dad, interesting bottles of Japanese whiskey for Christmas. Or that was sort of a way that he and Collin would exchange around interesting things happening in the food and beverage. Bourbon is so hot, but nobody's making a really great rye in the same way. That's what we tend to enjoy. Let's make rye whiskey. And this is, long into our kind of like daydreaming and brainstorming. We already had a business plan for this project that my dad came to separately. So it was a very aha moment. And my dad's background in finance and running a big business was exactly the part to, okay, here, now we have a partner who can do that. Collin can focus on the whiskey making. I can focus on the design and hospitality side. So it was kind of like the missing piece.
Yeah, everybody playing to their strengths.
Exactly. My dad sort of joked about it, but Collin's tall, bearded guy from East Tennessee. So he definitely like looks the part of whiskey maker. But
100% when he's holding a guitar, he looks the part.
Yeah. But he grew up in East Tennessee. His dad was a professor at University of Tennessee in chemical engineering, but taught distillation for 50 years. So he's grown up with
that works
kind
out.
of that language. And most of his family's in hydrology or chemical engineering, but he went into civil and environmental. So much overlap, though. So he has the language and kind of the mindset to be a distillation engineer. And I think a lot of people have the flavor profile or have like mixology desires or like the idea of it, but he really is approaching the whiskey making from the science and engineering of it. And I think that's what set us up to make a quality product.
Are there specific decisions that he has made that separate it from other whiskeys being produced?
Well, so our initial mash bill or recipe, the idea is that if we're in Chicago, if we're staying true to kind of our roots, we're using local resources. We're going to have grain grown in a cooler climate. So a rye grown in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Canada, Illinois is going to have a little bit more spice than a rye that's grown in that like
the
more southern, traditional area. So that just the flavor of the grains, using Lake Michigan water, using Minnesota white oak, weather is going to kind of influence a more northern recipe of a rye whiskey.
So are all the barrels Minnesota white oak?
All the barrels are Minnesota white oak.
So they're all virgin barrels.
Yes, all new charred oak. We worked with a cooperage in Minnesota for a little bit. It was a father-daughter team, and we liked that idea since it was father-daughter, son-in-law situation in our business as well. They kiln dry the wood, and then we now are working with a cooperage in Kentucky, and they air season all of the wood, so it sits for 2 years, and there's a noticeable difference in the way that the whiskey comes out of those barrels. So they're all Minnesota white oak that's been air seasoned and then charred, and then we put the whiskey in those.
What is the cooperage in Kentucky contributing?
They quarter saw all of the oak into staves, and then they put the barrel together.
From Minnesota,
yes,
but they're assembling it in
assemble
Kentucky
it.
And then putting it back to you.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
And then the Minnesota, my dad was from Minnesota, so that just like the regionality of that is important, but also colder weather trees are going to have tighter rings, and so that's going to interact with the whiskey in a different way.
And are these all 55-gallon traditional?
So when we first started, we would fill a 25, a 35, and a 53. Okay. And then we Collin is so data, engineer's mind, so data driven that he just, you can read all of the information, or there's this idea that smaller barrels can make it age faster. Yeah. And some people scoff at that because then it tastes too woody and
whatever.
Yeah, but wanted all the information for ourselves. So all the first barrels were very tiny differences in the amounts of grain that we were using, and then everything went into one of these 3 barrels. And pretty soon, even after just a few months, decided that those smaller barrels were in fact too woody, and we weren't going to use those. So we emptied all of the smallest ones, and actually now we put them into some used Woodford Reserve barrels. So those are finishing in something else to try to kind of mellow out that wood flavor. And now we're just using the bigger traditional barrels.
Cool. It's cool that you could see right away how much like the whiskey was leaching the wood flavors.
Yeah, and it's, everything is there's such a long timeline on the experiment or learning how it tastes. And I think another approach that maybe is a little bit different is I think some people, you cut the whiskey heads, hearts, and tails, so you get rid of the poison, and then you get rid of kind of like the dirty, gritty flavor. Some people do wider cuts in that hearts to have better yield, but Collin has been kept that pretty narrow to really let the kind of distillate come forward. And
they say the artistry is the cut.
Yeah, and I think he's got a good nose and a good palate, and that's been something where yield is maybe not as high, but then it ages really beautifully.
What's been your favorite expression so far?
So we have 4 that we're doing consistently. Initially, we were just planning to do rye and a high rye bourbon, but with this early experimentation, had some kind of surprises, and the surprises have been kind of the best sellers. So we have a red corn bourbon, which I love. That's kind of a fan favorite. The farmer in central Illinois who grows our corn said, "Hey, I have some of this Bloody Butcher heirloom variety. Do you want to try some?" So we were just going to mix it into kind of the rest of our bourbons, but kept it separate just for the data. And the flavor, it was amazing how different the flavor profile came through, even in the unaged spirit. So like a yellow dent corn is going to be a lot sweeter. That's going to give you a lot of that kind of traditional caramely bourbon flavor. The red corn is a slightly higher oil content, a little less sugar content, and a lot of people have described it literally as it tastes red. But I think berry or antioxidant. It has a little bit of a tartness to it. And it's clean, it's mellow, it's really lovely. It doesn't have, our traditional bourbon has a higher rye content too, because I think sort of house flavor is a little less sweet, just personal preference. So
are these all bottled at the same proof?
Yes, everything's at 94, and that we did sort of a test of barrel strength down to 80.
Yeah, that's the Elijah Craig proof as
well.
And
that was, you can see it. We have it on the shelf in the bar, kind of like favorites. The 94 was the one that people came back to the most.
Cool. And so you crowdsourced that info?
Just with our team.
Yeah.
And a few other folks.
Let's talk just like the basic build of a whiskey. Because specifically it has to be, I toured Buffalo Trace many years ago, and they went through the percentages of grains. What constitutes whiskey? What rye? How does that work?
Depends if it's straight bourbon or straight rye.
Well, at least does.
Yeah.
So I think that's a super common question, or a lot of times people are like, "How can you make bourbon if you're not in Kentucky?" But that's a very common question. To be bourbon, it just needs to be 51% corn. To be rye whiskey, it needs to be 51% rye. And
so your red corn, is that 51% 100% red corn, or is that mixed with a different corn?
So we've tried a few different mash bills, but we're doing the red corn is just red corn, no yellow corn. The rye, for a while we were doing 70% rye, 20% yellow corn, 10% malted barley. And then that changes a little. We did a 65, 15, 10. Everything consistently has 10% malted barley. Okay. And then that, we haven't gone down to 51%. We're keeping kind of the primary ingredient somewhere between 60 and 70.
It's the same barley across the board?
Yep.
Cool.
And then another kind of experiment is this single malt that we weren't intending to do. My dad was very fixated on this idea of doing a hickory smoked rye. And then that would give the rye a little bit of a smokier flavor. But we tried hickory smoked. We tried a number of smoked ryes and a number of smoked malted barleys, and then just did our rye. And then the intention was to blend them back together. But the rye had enough spiciness that it didn't need the smoke. You have the perception of a kind of smoky feel without that smell, and we liked it as it was. And then we had all of this smoked grain that we were experimenting with, and just sampling sort of these experimental batches. This applewood smoked barley was just delicious. It didn't have that artificial smoke flavor, and smoke can be very polarizing, but really nice, almost in like the mezcal territory. So we ended up bottling this single malt that was 65% applewood smoked malted barley, 35% malted barley, and we have smaller quantities of that. We were intending to just do limited release, but that's the one that's won the most medals. That's what people are coming in and asking for.
How do you guys smoke the grains yourself, or is there a facility?
No, there's a maltster in Indiana. A lot of people in Chicago work with these folks, and they'll do all sorts. They'll do like mango wood smoked, and anything you want. So we tried a few different things, and again with the data. Smoked barley or malted barley is regulated elsewhere. There are certain varieties that basically, like, once they go through the smoking or malting or distillation process, have a certain amount of carcinogens in them. And in Canada and Scotland, where that's a more common whiskey ingredient, there is more regulation. But single malt is kind of the last whiskey territory that's not
heavily regulated.
Yeah. But like rye, bourbon, all of that, those are legal classifications, and single malt is a little bit more. American single malt is sort of a new category that's very kind of on the rise. There's a lot of discussion, and it seems like there will be some regulations coming in very, very soon here. But any of the grains that we tried, Collin was sending them to be sampled to make sure that this conversion, and I've blah 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 blah.
Yeah,
I've heard enough of it, heard it enough times, but
you don't want it to be too carcinogenic.
Can't think of it right now. Yeah, so he kind of self-regulated, and then found one variety that doesn't have any traces of this chemical compound. So that it's kind of cool. Again, engineering driven approach to the process.
Yeah.
Cool.
This might be another stupid question, but how is proof calculated and measured? And another, this one's really stupid, but why do we have, why is proof twice the percentage?
Yeah.
Is that just left over from?
Yeah, it was like, I think it had to do with like gunpowder and like the proof at which the gunpowder ignited.
Oh,
so that's
really?
kind of like the history of how proof became a thing.
I didn't know that. That's one of those things.
I think so. I mean, I can't wait to get roasted, for, pun intended. But I can't wait to get roasted for this take later on.
We'll look into it, fact check it.
I'm pretty sure that's the origin.
But yeah, it's just redundant. It's just a weird complication. And
know,
when you guys refer to it,
annoying.
do you always refer to proof?
Pretty much, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And then when you guys you're talking about kind of that bell curve, or not bell curve, but where you decided on 90, is it 94 proof?
Yes.
So how
it comes out of the barrel
I was
at
correct.
Like 110.
So, yeah.
Do you want to?
I'll give you the brief.
Yeah.
Proof is so called because back in England in the 1500s, the government would levy a higher tax on liquor containing a higher amount of alcohol. Alcohol content was determined via a rather crude test. Basically, the government would soak a gun pellet with alcohol and try to set fire to the gunpowder. There you go.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah. Now we know.
Yeah.
Nicely done, Danny.
Yeah, I mean, I barely had it, but yeah.
You have a little, it looks like one of the little guns that you scan your groceries with that has kind of a straw in the bottom. And you put that in and it tells you your
digital read automatically.
Yep.
So, And that's the only thing affecting your proof is time, right?
No,
after the distillation process has begun.
So, the way that it goes through the still is going to impact how it is. The cuts are going to impact your proof a little bit. It has to go into the barrel. This again is I'll get roasted if I say the wrong number, but it's like it can't be under 116. It can't be over 120. Those numbers. One of the distillers could tell you more accurately, but there are regulations on the proof that it needs to go into the barrel. Otherwise, it can't be called whiskey. It would be called like a distilled spirit special or something. So there's no way to increase the proof after if you put it through the still. So if it comes in too low, then it's like light whiskey, or it has to be something different.
Yeah, if it's too low, there's no going back.
Right. So it all goes into the barrel between 110 and 115 proof, and then it comes out of the barrel. Sometimes the proof can increase if there's a lot of evaporation, like more water is coming out. So in hotter climates, you might get a higher proof barrel strength pull, or in cooler climates with less evaporation, it might stay a little bit more steady at whatever it entered.
And that evaporation is known as the angel's share, Danny?
It's true. Share.
Yeah. So let's talk yield for a minute. So when you're filling a barrel, so what did you say, 53? So what's the evaporation rate? How long does it take to lose half that volume?
It could be as much as 5% per year.
Yeah. Isn't that the general? Yeah.
Yep. And it's we have this big, basically, poured concrete bunker that it's like 4-hour fire rated explosion proof room where all of the barrels are stored. Excuse me. And we have HVAC in there, but we don't use it. So there is some fluctuation with temperature. But if let's say it's like 85 outside, it might be 78 in the barrel room. I think it's gotten up to about 85 degrees in there and down to probably 50 degrees, 53 if it's
super cold.
Yeah.
Super cold. So we get a little fluctuation, and that's what causes the barrels to contract. That's what imparts the aging flavor.
Yeah. So theoretically, if you had your barrels in a place that sees wild temperature swings, could that expedite the process?
It's just more evaporate. You'd probably have more angels. You'd lose more of the whiskey.
Yeah.
If there's a lot more heat. But yes, theoretically, like
because the barrels are essentially breathing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why they don't. That's why Elise is saying that they don't temp control the warehouse, even though it could be.
Yeah, I remember when I was at Buffalo Trace, they're talking about like even different locations in the barns or whatever. Like you're going to see different flavor
and so
profiles.
people have so many theories about that, but they'll rotate barrels higher places in a warehouse, or people will blast a subwoofer in their storage room to have more vibration, or people put their barrels on boats, and that movement is going to.
And you guys sing to your barrels.
We sing folk music to our barrels.
Your kids sing to them.
Let's transition a little bit into the events. Well, let's talk about the space first. Did you guys start out, was your first distilling there, or did you move into that space?
First distillation to scale was there. We did a little bit of smaller scale experimenting before moving in there. We'd looked at a place over kind of by your spot over on West Carroll, kind of industrial corridor.
How far west? West of Western? Over by like Land and Sea?
Yep. And then, whiskey it smells, it's loud. We mill our own grain. The equipment gets loud. So we were interested in that space over on West Carroll, but had a hard time getting neighbors to agree that it was a good business to move in. And then we found this space. We're in Rockwell on the river, between Belmont and Elston. Really beautiful old leather tannery courtyard, kind of.
It's such a cool
wonky buildings with sort of funny additions where you can imagine like leather carts moving along this mezzanine. And the developer also owns and redeveloped Bridgeport Arts Center down by Comiskey.
Yeah,
what's that
there
called
you go.
now?
Good. It is
US
currently
Cellular.
No, it's guaranteed rate.
Oh, guaranteed
Yeah,
rate. Sorry.
It's Comiskey.
Yeah.
So great vision, and his idea for this space was to create kind of a food and beverage campus that was somewhat similar to what he's done with Bridgeport Art Center, which is events and artist studios. So good track record for getting kind of collaborative, like-minded collaborative tenants together. But
when was it redone, actually? Were you was there anything in your space before you were there?
No, we first looked at the space in 2015.
Okay.
I was pregnant with Lewis, who's about to be 8.
Yeah.
And we knew that there was a brewery going in. It's right when Half Acre was moving from their Lincoln location to their new Balmoral place. But I was like, maybe we'll be neighbors with Half Acre, because they hadn't announced where they were yet. But Metropolitan is who's there. Yep. And then Metropolis Coffee Roasters, that was the space that I kind of fell in love with, because it's like these beautiful heavy timber bow truss ceilings, but it was just too much space for us. So we had this kind of funky little front building that wasn't as picturesque as some of these other facilities, but still really, really lovely exposed brick and heavy timber. But we signed the letter of intent kind of late in 2015, and a couple weeks later, a fire that started in this front office building took the whole second floor off of our building. So we thought we were going to go back to, maybe we'd appeal that West Carroll landlord or kind of back to the drawing board. But what ended up happening is that they reconstructed the space with our use in mind. So the timber that was in there was actually like 2 inches shy of what you need to keep it exposed. So we would have had to drop the ceilings, even though there was this amazing wood there. So now we have the timber that's the right scale to leave it exposed. And then the mezzanine that was around the whole side of the building we kept for our office, but now we just have a big open room for where the barrel storage is. And then the production room, we actually didn't put the second floor back in. So now we basically have a 2-story room where the still is, that gives it a lot of space. And the still that we use is made in Louisville, Kentucky, Vendome. It's just a beautiful piece of equipment. So we get to kind of have that column go high into the ceiling, and we could scale. We have 4 fermentation tanks now, but we could kind of scaffold and do a second level kind of build up. But it's a big, beautiful room full of copper and steel.
How many barrels are being aged at any given time?
We have about 450 barrels right now, and we have capacity to increase production, but our storage was kind of the bottleneck for a little while. Will Glasick, who I mentioned earlier, who grows our corn, they have a small distilling operation as well. And so he has a big warehouse down in Paxton, Illinois. So he'll bring a couple big totes of corn and then take some barrels back to their facility.
And then some in Tim's apartment.
I have some bottles stored in my liquor cabinet. It's true.
It's not really scratching, not really making a dent.
No. Sorry.
I need more.
I could take on more anytime.
Yeah. Right now,
barrels.
we fill approximately a barrel a day with our production schedule, but we could ramp that up to, we're doing more like, instead of 5 a week, we're doing 15 a week or so.
Yeah.
So that's the goal, but we'll fill and empty. But in this early phase, I mean, we started distilling in January 2020. So we have a couple of barrels that just turned 3, but now we have more and more consistent product that's 2 years of age that we can pull from. But until, March of this year, we were just like emptying half barrels or quarter barrels to fill enough bottles to kind of fill our shelves and the handful of accounts that we have.
How old do you want it to get?
2 years is like pretty optimal for a rye. Bourbons, I'd say, 4 years is going to give you a better quality. We'll try a 6-year. I mean, I think favorite batches will hold back, a third to half of the barrel so that we can do a reserve release or something. So we'll just keep trying. So much of why we got started is an interest in experimentation and curiosity, and it's fun that we don't have to stop. I mean, we'll continue to do these 4 flagship products, but just distilled a rum. I don't think we'll ever bring that to market, but we do have this tasting room where there's an opportunity to share we're
Cool.
about to release, it'll just be 100 bottles or so of a smoked bourbon. So it's a smoked corn and smoked malted barley. So there are opportunities to kind of play a little bit.
Cool.
All right, we've grilled you enough on the whiskey part. Let's talk about the branding and packaging. Which,
Okay. That's a little bit more my territory.
Yeah, so the packaging is beautiful, award-winning packaging.
Thank you, yes.
Let's talk about where you guys started. I mean, we know where the name comes from, your dad, and Collin's last name.
Yep.
Dad's first name, Collin's last name. How did you start with the branding, logos, fonts, all that stuff? Where did you take the lead on everything?
We had a couple of iterations. We worked, Potluck Creative also kind of by you.
Mikey.
We worked with Mikey, we worked with Sam Jordan, who's not with Potluck anymore, on a very early version. That was probably back in 2016. For kind of like sample bottles or just early experimentation. And then we worked with another gal, Wink is her brand. She's done a lot of kind of consumer food, Voges and
I've seen her stuff. Yeah.
And it's tricky because you don't want to lean too heavily into heritage, or you don't want to lean too heavily into newness. And I think what we're trying to do is create a very simple quality, superb product. And so branding needs to match that. And so we are very design minded, but there needs to be something that's super classic and approachable without feeling too throwback. And I think that's a hard balance to strike.
Yeah, especially, with, the whiskey world is a thing of tradition and heritage. So how do you walk that line as a new brand? Yeah, that's a really delicate balance.
Right, and in a way that feels true to what our story is, which is, like a Tennessee engineer with a distillation background and, Minnesota-raised businessman who grew up on farms building silos and is like obsessed with trees and grains and cool stuff. And we're a Chicago brand, and so we played with the Chicago Star for a long time too. But that's done. So
it's so tempting to go after that star, and everyone does it, but it's really hard to work that star into branding, without it looking like, Grant Park merch for tourists.
Totally, or like the Department of Cultural Affairs or whatever that is, and not leaning too heavily on any of those pillars of what makes our brand. So it was a challenge. And I also, my role is kind of design and community, but after my dad passed away, I took over a lot more operations. So I didn't quite have the bandwidth to take full responsibility for it in the same way. So we ended up bringing on these designers from Austin, Texas, Land.
We love Land.
They've done a number of whiskey brands. They're partners in Madre Mezcal, which is like all the rage right now. And they take a really lovely approach, kind of holistically thinking about all of that. And I think the first stuff that we got back from them felt a little too new, or we were missing. They heard us say that we were creating sort of a new brand in a new region, and it felt like it was missing that simplicity and groundedness. So it's lots of back and forth, and I think because I have so much design background, I'm probably a pretty challenging client to have because I'm making
hands-on,
corrections. Or
How many
very
revisions were there until you landed on the final branding?
I couldn't tell you. Enough that they sort of gave me their blessing to make the changes that I needed to, and which is a good compliment, and it just. I think they trusted that my aesthetic was aligned with theirs, and so any of those last little tweaks, they said you got it. But what we ended up with, and it's a tall, simple bottle, not oversized by any means. It doesn't nothing ostentatious or crazy, just simple, elegant, approachable, and what we ended up doing, I think there are a lot of things in whiskey that are kind of overdone or kind of traditional. Like rye tends to be in a green bottle, bourbon tends to be in a yellow or orange toned label. I think those make sense because those are the colors of the grains, and we have a little bit of that in our color palette as well. But grains are used, and we had this sculpture, this carved limestone sculpture at our home growing up. It was called Tree of Life, and it has it looks a little bit like corn, or a little bit like that symbol Tree of Life, which I think represents so many good things in multiple cultures. And we'd gone back and forth about the star or incorporating grain or something, and they felt unrepresentative of the brand as a whole. But this Tree of Life, I think, kind of clicked into place. So I actually did a little hand-carved block, and so some kind of early revisions from what the designers had sent us. It's like, this is the motif that we're going to use now. So I did a block print and then sort of a hand-drawn version of that. And then they took it and did like a digital vector that kind of cleaned it up a little bit. And so that is kind of the motif on the top of the bottle, where it's a nod to the grains that we're using, but also kind of stands for something a little bit more familial.
Now, I mentioned the award-winning packaging. So you guys have won a lot of awards recently. How do these competitions, what does that look like? What does the preparation look like, and then the actual event, and how does that happen?
Some, like the first medals we got were for our rye and our single malt, and that was last year at the ACSA, American Craft Spirits Association conference. And they did an awards ceremony. We go to some of these distilling conferences, but Joe and Peter, our two distillers besides Collin, happened to be there. So it was really fun. Like they were there and got to go up and receive the medals. And there are a handful that are kind of the prominent spirits competitions. You send in a few bottles and your competition fee, and then there are panels of judges. They're bartenders or distillers or super smellers is a term that some of the whiskey people have, and so it's a blind taste test basically, and then there's a point system.
So there's no commentary from you. It's not like, tell us about your process. It's just like, send them a bottle, they'll do the judging.
Yes, and I think different people do it differently, but some don't even give the judges the same order of spirits, because that can introduce some bias.
Because the order in which you taste does affect how you rate.
Absolutely. Or hearing somebody else, or just
like, number 2 is very good.
Exactly. So I think there's various levels of seriousness and how that's set up.
It's so fascinating how that's executed.
So we submitted to four competitions, and all 4 of our spirits ended up receiving medals from all 4 of the competitions. So super proud of Collin and Pete and Joe. And it's good. You get people who come in and buy a bottle or come back or enjoy coming to the tasting room, and it's a good experience, and they bring their friends. But for a project this big that we've been sort of had our heads down working on for so long, I mean, since 2015, and then thinking about it before that, it's awesome. It's awesome.
It's
affirmation. Yeah. And I think that I don't know how much that will impact our long-term trajectory, but I do think that there are people who pay attention to that.
It's not going to hurt it.
And it will set us, it sets us up. And we had very early considered sourcing, but pandemic sort of changed that. A lot of new brands, to get over that 2-year aging hump, will source bulk spirits and blend it, or just source it, and it's marketing brands who are out there. But through pandemic and all of our early to market restaurants and bars being closed, we just kept producing and kept producing, and that was a risk to take too, where we were delaying our revenue stream. But we got to 18 months, and it was like, this is good at 18 months. We're gonna push for this last 6 months and only release our own stuff, and that felt like a risky decision to make. financially where we were, and getting these awards feels like a big affirmation, like that was the right choice.
But it's also cool for your consistency of product. You didn't just sell like MGPI stuff for 2 years and then sold your own product, which would taste totally different.
Absolutely.
So what do you hope for in the future for Judson and Moore? Like, what are the next, in your wildest dreams, what does it look like in 10 years?
10 years, I think we will theoretically outgrow our current production facility. But I love the space, the way that it all came together, our neighbors, that the neighborhood is really growing and changing. So, maybe that will remain sort of the primary destination for tours or tastings. We host music there regularly. But having some sort of offsite production. I'd love to own a building. I think that's that comes with its own set of challenges for sure. But increase production somewhere else.
Cool.
Let's talk briefly about the events you host. You mentioned community as part of your role, and I know you have a nice network in Chicago. How have you brought in culture into the space?
So we events primarily focus on music right now. As we said earlier, Collin and I are both musicians, so it's a great place to be able to bring in friends to play. I think we could kind of thought of sticking to bluegrass, Americana, folk music, but somebody that we've worked with a lot, or Sully Davis has a production company called Local Universe, and he's somebody that used to book us at the Hideout, and always really respected his sort of taste, his drive, his musical network. So had very early talked to him about maybe doing a series, but it just so happened that alignment that he had been working part-time, like managing a farmer's market, and was wanting to focus more on music. And so there was an opportunity for him to kind of help us with some of those supplemental things like social media or just getting the brand ready to open. So he was helping with kind of random tasks and then booking one show a month. And then that turned into 2 shows a month, 1 show a week. And so we have a lot of great local bands, but because of his history in Chicago, in music in general, he's getting tapped by a lot of great booking agents. So we've gotten some really lovely national artists stopping through on their tours, and that's been a really fun way for people to, kind of going back to that idea of it's not a shooting whiskey, it's a sipping whiskey. Getting people to engage in activity around beautiful things, around lovely people, really promoting connection and lifestyle and enjoyment beyond the product that we're making.
Yeah, holistic experience around the brand. It's important.
All right, so before we get to the gratuity round, is there anything else you'd like to cover that we haven't already covered?
Any shout outs?
Classic. We'll get to that probably.
All right, Elise, are you ready for the gratuity round?
I don't know. I just got nervous.
Her body language is saying no.
Yeah, but it also could be excitement.
Yeah,
like
it could be.
Excitement.
She can't wait to tell us what her death row meal is.
My death row meal.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd go for sushi or steak street tacos.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your street taco spot?
Zacatecana, right on California, by the distillery, is a good place to go for a good steak burrito.
Yeah.
And then what's your sushi spot?
Sushi's tricky. I haven't had really good sushi in a long time. I love good sushi, but I end up enjoying mediocre sushi a lot of the time.
There's a lot of those spots.
Same.
We've been enjoying Sushi Doku. We live not far from there, and that's a solid takeout for us. It's convenient.
Nice shout out.
It is a good shout out.
Doku represent.
Susan and Harlan, we appreciate you. All right, what's your favorite hidden gem restaurant?
Back to the Mexican, El Barco Mariscos on Ashland.
Good one.
Cool.
And what's the order there? Got to get a michelada.
I like the michelada. The margaritas are sweet, but I don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
I get a whole red snapper.
Okay.
And their chili paste dip is so delicious.
I haven't been to El Barco in a while.
Let's do it.
Yeah, it's patio season.
Let's add it to the
have you been to Alegrias across the street from there?
Probably. I used to live there and just I love a good taco.
Yeah. They have a kind of signature shrimp dish that's really tasty. All right. What is your favorite fast food?
Tim's been one-upping all of your answers. I love this.
I'll keep it going.
I'm not big into fast food.
No, I didn't think you were, but in a pinch on a road trip with the kids, where are you going?
Wendy's.
Wendy's, okay.
Spicy chicken
Second person to
sando.
mention Wendy's.
I like I mean, maybe it's because they're sort of a healthful option. I like the baked potato
Okay.
with all of the ingredients. Sometimes they have broccoli, cheese, and sour cream and chives.
Loaded potato.
But I also like a Culver's Butterburger.
Excellent choice. All right. What unexpected trivia category would you dominate?
I'm pretty good with the celebrity category.
Really? Mm-hmm. Pop culture?
Pop culture, yeah.
You and Shannon should get together and talk about that stuff.
I remember people and names, so
yeah.
I can do that.
Okay, good one. To what do you attribute your success?
Hard work, opportunity. That people, I think, remembering people, being connected. I think there's a lot to be said about building your community up, and you'll be supported in similar ways.
Yeah. What is something that bars or restaurants do that might annoy you?
Fabuloso.
Fabuloso.
It's like that purple cleaning
Oh, the cleaning,
stuff.
yeah.
Oh,
and that you
wow.
Can smell.
It smells, and leaving a place, like you were saying earlier, you leave and you have to wash your clothes because they smell too much like cigarettes. If I've been into a place, even if I didn't notice it when I was in there, and my clothes smell like that after, it leaves me feeling a little yucky.
That's a great answer, and I can't believe it hasn't come up yet.
Yeah, I don't know how often that has happened to me. Does it happen to you frequently?
There are some places where it seems a little more
Egregious.
poignant.
Yeah.
Man, I need to get that list to avoid.
I got a sensitive nose though.
Yeah, that's
Which is maybe good for whiskey making.
Yeah. I was up at in Door County when I was a kid, maybe in high school, and we had to evacuate a restaurant because someone in the back had mixed cleaning chemicals. And it was like, it started with like, what's that smell? And then people coming like, excuse me, everybody, we need you to head towards the exit. We had a mishap in the kitchen.
Terrible fumes.
Yeah. All right. And then our last question. What is the best thing about Chicago's dining scene?
Oh man, Chicago is just the best dining scene. So I think, is that a cop-out answer?
But why?
Why? I mean, there's such amazing talent here. There's so much amazing farmland nearby. So you don't think of, it's not California. You don't have like amazing fresh greens all year round, but you do have like, cattle, pigs, and then amazing. There are just really great small farms that are, I think, supporting the farm to table movement, and then so much talent and innovation in. And there's great design. I think Chicago is a city that people stay in because community is so important, and so the way that chefs and restaurateurs support each other makes it so that there's kind of access and education that's part of all of these destinations.
No, let's pray for rain for the farmers. All right. Well, that's a wrap on Elise. Thanks so much
All right,
for joining us
thanks for having
today.
me.
Thanks for being here.